on this computer. Great.
Good evening, and welcome to the new season of the Poetry Playhouse Open Mic. We've been doing these Zooms since March of 2020. So we have actually 4.5 years worth of videos. They're up on YouTube at the Jules Nyquist channel. You can check out the old ones if you'd like. And we have three incredibly talented writers tonight that are associated with the University of New Mexico Press. I'll tell you a bit more about them in a minute, but we're happy that you're joining in tonight. I thought I would read a short poem of my own from my recent book, Tubbables, to get things started. And I just did a little tour, a little mini book tour up in Western New York, and glad to be back in New Mexico, although I love Western New York as well. So this is an older poem that I republished because it seemed pertinent to things that were unfortunately happening in the world today. And it's called Rose Petal Jelly for Yevgenia. I ate rose petal jelly with my toast this morning. Rose petal jelly produced in the Pyrenees, given me by a Ukrainian friend living in the US to accompany my whole grain toast product of Canada. That's the kind of global exchange I can stomach, like folk songs carried by peddlers along with their packs, or some new algebra spread camelback along the Great Silk Road. Not tons of bioengineered corn, melamine-filled pet food, lead-tipped toys, crates and crates and crates full of Bibles and munitions, just a pot of rose petal jelly. And first up, we are going to feature Sarah Kotchian, who lives in Albuquerque, where she's a consultant in environmental and public health systems and services. Sarah's Camino, a book of poems about the author's 500-mile solo pilgrimage in Spain, received the New Mexico-Arizona Book Award and the Seven Sisters Book Award. Her collection, Light of Wings, poems from UNM Press this year, is a 2024 finalist in the New Mexico-Arizona Book Awards. A contributor at the 2019 Breadloaf Writers Conference and a Pushcart nominee, her writing has appeared in many journals: Flyway, Split Rock Review, Stone Boat Literary Journal, Tiny Seed Literary Journal, Tulip Tree Press, Wingless Dreamer, Persimmon Tree, Bosque Journal, Listen Presence, and Albuquerque in print, as well as on the podcast, The Unruly Muse. Help us to introduce or to welcome Sarah Kotchian.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to Jules and John for sponsoring this gathering of community so often, 4.5 years on Zoom. We all know what March 2020 was and brought about. So thank you, and I'm so delighted to be reading with my good friends and colleagues, Katherine Seluja and Hilda Raz. So it's just a thrill to be here, and some of my friends from around the country. It's just such a blessing to have you take the time to come in. I'm going to read 2 poems first from Camino, the book that John mentioned. And this is a pilgrimage that I made in 2012 in Spain. Many of you probably, some have walked it, some maybe have many friends who've walked it now. And the book has 2 pages for every day that I walked, which is 39 days, average of about 13 miles a day. And the Camino is a special place. People answer the call to go. They don't know why always, and they just go. And you walk and walk day after day, and it does something to you. It helps you shed layers, and people come across your path to bring you the blessings, and sometimes it comes in the form of pain, and sometimes it's in the form of kindness. And so this book is about that. So my first poem I'll read you is the first full day of walking. The first day you walk from France over the Pyrenees into Spain. And that's one of the longer days of the Camino. This is called Passage. I am climbing for hours past Pyrenean villages, whitewashed houses, red tile roofs. A sign for fresh goat cheese. The air is chill beneath a blue sky, bearing the faintest hint of spring. I am learning to look for the yellow arrows. The narrow fields of the valley are white with frost, like our breath in the morning air. Snow on the peaks we will cross. The hillsides fall below us as we climb, the earth still covered with dry leaves of autumn, the fresh, cold brook running past fields pale green after receding snow. The branches of beech and hazel, bare but holding high the promise that we will see spring before too long. At midday, we take the first of many siestas, pilgrims sprawled on the leaves with packs and boots scattered in total surrender to the earth. In late afternoon, we cross the pass, the little village in France impossibly far behind. We have walked 16 miles today through the forest. We see the gray tiled roofs of Roncesvalles. We are in Spain. Bienvenidos, peregrinos. Passport stamps, 16 bunks, showers, laundry, a simple meal with companions, a pilgrim mass sung in Spanish. The voices of the three priests blending and magnified in the church from the Middle Ages. How many notes have these old stone walls echoed? How many blessings they have sheltered. It is evening of the first day. This second poem comes from a day after a time when I received some hurt from another pilgrim I'd been walking with, and it came unexpectedly. And so it kind of went in deeply because you've been walking a long time, you're tired and you're vulnerable, and it wasn't expected. So I left early the next morning just to walk by myself and to, just review all of that. And this is called Balm. Balm comes in many forms this day. The bright stars overhead as I leave before dawn. The glimmer of flowing waters at first light. My shadow before me leading to the horizon. There's nothing to separate me from my thoughts and my feet on the path. No cafe for 10 miles, no breakfast, no coffee, no interruptions for healing. I walk fasting and I meditate. The sorrows of the day before are bathed in the new morning light. I cross 8 streams, our courses overrunning. The geese return to the north. 2 hawks soar. An older man tips his hat to the beautiful young lady. He is referring to me. My spirit rises as peace descends. This day marks the halfway point on my journey, and I see how far I have to go. I think how little I understand about unconditional love and grace, the irony of living out of scarcity in the presence of unending abundance. In the mid-afternoon, I stop. The albergue has a garden. I write, wash clothes. I sit in a nearby park, listen to the steady sound of a bee buzzing nearby. It turns out to be an old dog snoring in the sunny courtyard. I am grateful. The music and words of a Celtic blessing song come to me. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Where there is wounding, there is also consolation, and balm comes in many forms. These next poems I'd like to read are from my new book, Light of Wings, from University of New Mexico Press. And Hilda will hear from, is the editor of the Mary Burritt Christensen Poetry Series from the University of New Mexico Press. The first poem is called Winter Tides. When her cancer reached stage 4, she made collages, odd pieces of a life, cards made by children, bits of hand-sewn lace, scraps of poems, photos with ragged edges, no longer needing symmetry, memories in 3 dimensions, layers piling up. Important now to see the whole life in the frame, some mementos outside it, this terrible liberation. It was warm for February. We took sandwiches and beer to the beach on the island where she lives, sat sheltered on the slatted walk, ignored the sign that said, "For dinghies only." We laughed. If anyone tried to move us, we'd argue that we met the definition. The tide at the pause between coming in and going out, leaving strips of flotsam in its wake. Dried seaweed, mussel shells purple as twilight, translucent beach glass, green, brown, aqua, rounded by waves. Sun slanting on blue water, bald eagle, migrating grebes diving, the clang of the buoy sounding over the cold bay, the moon rising, not quite full. We bent again and again, laying up treasures, broken pieces of color in our blue plastic pails, ridged scallop shell, skeletal frond of kelp, seagull feather, slipper boat, gray rocks with iridescent shimmers, revealing scenes within scenes, as we turned them this way and that to catch the light until the shadows and the cold overtook us. We turned for home, like grebes, like the tides, like breath. Ephemerals. We are on the hunt for spring ephemerals. My sister, a botanist, says they are in the woods this time of year. Our mother has just eaten her lunch. We take advantage of that brief energy, help her walk to the car. My sister drives, our mother in the front seat, walker safely stowed in back. My sister knows where to look among dry leaves, under bare trees. Car inches along the country road, damp earth smells float in. Our mother is quiet, spring breeze soft against her face. My sister stops the car, points, frail white and yellow flowers just 2 feet away. Dutchman's breeches, she exclaims. Oh, I love Dutchman's breeches, my mother echoes from her seat. We drive farther, my sister stops again. Trout lilies. Our mother looks at the yellow flowers, leaves mottled brown like trout, her hands in her lap. Each time my sister stops the car, another patch of color, red trillium, bellwort, trailing arbutus, wood anemones, spring beauties, a flower name we decide is true for us that day. We are only gone an hour, time to return. Our mother is tired. We drive home on winding roads, walk back to the apartment, get her settled in her chair. She takes a nap. We put the car away. The light is growing dim. We look at her painting of wildflowers on the wall. Turn on the table lamp. And the other one, hold on. It's called What If. What if stone in the mouth is one way a body makes prayer? Forehead longs to love the ground or body to meet sky. What if prayer is not always voice? If silence is not void, but layers of meaning that take form in dark, in time, gestating the one word that can be spoken into being, into breath? What if every breath is prayer, whispered to earth by day, sky at night, so that each inhalation flow of muscle, bone, skin is response, request, so that each day our litany of incantation is silence, singing word, world into being. And my last one, I will, it was written in March 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's entitled Murmuration. A murmuration is a group of birds that appears and turns in the light and disappears and reappears. So in this time of needing each other in community is still true, and the kind of community that Jules and John create and all of us try to maintain is just as important now. Murmuration. Great cloud of starlings pulses, shape shifts, script never seen before, written on thin air. We without wings watch in awe, exhale delight, wonder as cloud turns, disappears, appears again against the sky. In murmuration, scientists say, each bird keeps track of 7 others, maintains distance so each can fly, 1 starling and 1,000. We too keep distance, know our neighbors, safeguard the flock on airwaves. It is sometimes dark, but then we turn as one and catch the light. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Wonderful. And I love the murmuration applied to the pandemic. Yeah, that's a really interesting analogy. So thank you. So we're going to have a little discussion with the poets after we get finished with the readings. And our next reader is Katherine Seluja, who lives in Santa Fe, where she's a poetry editor at Unbroken Journal. A poet and a microfiction writer, Katherine has also worked in pediatrics for over 40 years, something that informs some of her work. Her most recent poetry collection, Point of Entry, UNM Press 2023, focuses on issues of immigration and ancestry. Her previous book, Gather the Night, also UNM Press, is dedicated to her older brother who lived with schizophrenia and substance abuse disorder. She's co-author with Tina Carlson and Stella Reed of the award-winning collaborative collection, We Are Meant to Carry Water. And that's from 3 Ataos Press, 2019, another great New Mexico press. Katherine's poem, November Fruit, is on permanent display at the Helen Wurlitzer Foundation as part of the Taos Poetry in Nature project. Her recent work can be found in South 85 Journal, Medmic, Cutthroat, and Taos Journal of Poetry. Please welcome Katherine Seluja. You may unmute, Katherine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, John. Sarah, that was lovely, absolutely beautiful. Your poems are always like small prayers for me. And so I was being very meditative listening to you. Thank you. And thank you to John and Jules. Thank you for hosting this and for all the support you've continued for many years to give the poetry community. And thank you to all of you who are here. And of course, Hilda, my love, my mentor, my great teacher, and my editor. Thank you for joining us to read all together. I'll be reading this evening just from Point of Entry, the most recent book. And hang on 1 second, guys. I'm going to turn my own little timer on to keep track. And as John mentioned, the poems in this book focus on various issues of immigration. A number of them focus on conflict at our southern border, which is still going on. I'm sure many of you are aware, but some might not be because it's sort of passed out of the de rigueur news cycle at the moment, but there's much tension and suffering and strife happening at our southern border and of course across many other countries related to immigration. So I'm going to start with the opening poem, and that's called Desert Manifest. This poem is somewhat of an homage to the volunteers and particularly physicians who work in the Sonoran Desert attempting to identify remains, and when they can identify them, attempting to reunite them with their families. The poem starts with a small piece, a small epigraph from the Hippocratic Oath, which is the oath that physicians take when they begin their practice. Desert Manifest. There is an art to medicine as well as science, and warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug. A doctor labors in Sonoran heat, cataloging bones. The work is grueling. Sometimes she whispers to the bones, rarely they whisper back. A group of bones occasionally found together, but more often a femur or an ulna, the long medial bone of the forearm separated from the rest. Coyote, turkey vulture. Its shaft is triangular. And the desert is their ocean-faring ship, a list of names scribed across the sand. At the edge of sleep, some slim truth or partial answer to her list of many questions. So many without name or identification. This isn't what she had trained for, not what she had imagined. Her classmates envied her dissections. The secret, never ask the body to give up its truths alone. Each bone is indexed and sent to the state lab for genetic confirmation. Let each one place an X upon the line beside their name. Not what she had imagined, coyote, turkey vulture. She thought her own practice. Somewhere her name would be known for midnight house calls, kitchen table consultations. And the desert exhales its sail wings, moves its passengers forward. The doctor brushes dried blood from a scapula that serves as origin of the muscles that move the arm. Let an accounting be done. An accounting done. As I mentioned to those of you who were here, and Chip, who's here with us, mentioned, I just had the great fortune to be in Italy for about 10 days, a little bit north of Rome primarily. Most of the time on a writing retreat and some of the time just having fun and visiting. And it was, of course, wonderful to be in Italy, but especially very meaningful for me as I reconnected yet again in a very deep way to my heritage. All of my grandparents on both sides are from Italy. And so the next few poems I'm going to read are the ancestor poems that are written in their honor. This one is called carciofo, which is the Italian word for artichoke. As the Dutch had carried it to King Henry's court, and the French to Louisiana much later, he carried it, a most precious thing, in the aluminum Dutch oven before him. His hands protected by insulated mitts, he carried it like the gift it was. This spiky, unreachable, this inflorescent cousin of thistle, the plant that grew wild in the fields and sandy soil in the Sicilian hill town where he was born. He was 14 when his father sent him west across the Atlantic into the hands of friends of friends. Strani, his mother complained as she wrapped a small loaf of bread and a rind of cheese into a linen cloth. His father sent him in search of something more to this place across the sea. He would find that more and make it better still. With a handshake and a paper bag of paper money, he would buy land and profit, build a few shops, grow the new world, a wife and a son, and his son would too, until this night, when my grandfather walks the few suburban steps to our house, past the leaning willow Mr. Hickey refuses to cut down, past Mrs. Shearer's yard filled with English roses. He steps carefully over the uneven square of cement pushed forth by the unruly root of sycamore. The glowing silver pot filled with the manna of his childhood, hand stuffed for his son's family, a precious thing made more so by its inner secret, its soft and delicate heart protected by a wreath of spiny thorns, sharp enough to draw blood from the thumb of a careless cook. The layered green leaves filled with garlic and breadcrumbs, just as his mother had shown him, despite his father yelling from the garden, "Ho bisogno di quel ragazzo qui," demanding the boy come now. Green with parsley and overflowing with grated Romano. Roman steps, his steps, along this New Jersey street, carrying the steaming pot to our front door. And I got to tell you guys, I'm going to be in New Jersey tomorrow, so it's even more powerful for me to be reading that right now. Okay, I'm hopping over to the other side of the family and going to read you a poem about my mother's mother, my grandmother Serafina, and she was from northern Italy, from the lake region near Lago Maggiore. I asked my grandmother to repeat the story. She takes a small breath and begins again to tell the story of my grandfather arriving in this country. He was young and traveled alone and almost ended up in Buenos Aires like his sister, but that ship had left port the day before. And though it is my grandmother's nap time and her afternoon fatigue has set in, the tremor of her left hand wrapping a rhythmic backdrop on our wooden kitchen table, still she doesn't say no. Her pale blue cardigan dances with her northern Italian blue eyes. My grandfather arrived in New York with no English and no directions to his uncle's home, carrying only the words his father had given him. He asked all who might understand, "Dieci moschi? Dieci moschi?" searching for his uncle and his future. When finally a paesano made the connection, "Dieci moschi, 10 flies." Il Paisan directed my grandfather to the ferry that took him across the Hudson River and then a train on the Jersey side to his uncle's town, Tenafly. I laughed every time, and now I know that was why my grandmother never refused a retelling of the story. A small flame lit up in her northern blue eyes, and a soft chuckle rocked her shoulders and thin frame. She'd take another sip of her tea, sigh, and ask me to help her to bed. How we doing? We're doing okay time-wise, right, Jules? I'm doing okay time-wise? Yeah, okay. So this is the sort of the sister poem, I want to say, to the artichoke poem. My grandfather teaches me how to flay the heart. It was considered ritual in our family, the cleaning of the spiny thistle, a passing of tradition and knowledge, the confidence that one could handle the blade as well as the spine. Caterina, my grandfather calls, questo è come è fatto. This is how it's done. And with thorny heart in one hand and blade in the other, he teases apart the layers, each leaf nested tight within the next. The spiny thorns grow sharper with progression toward the heart. He left his heart in the sandy soil of his Sicilian hill town home the day he boarded the ship that would take him west across the sea. Sitting at his kitchen table, he passes me the layered heart with strong warning, never leave a single thorn in place. A teasing out, a gentle splay. My grandfather's hand on mine, his shoulder solid for me to lean on. A stone wall built around a small village. I was lucky enough, one of the traditions in the group that we did the writing retreat on is the last night we have a salon. And often people they read whatever they want, maybe some work they just generated. But we were there about an hour and a half north of Rome, and I knew I had to read a few of these ancestor poems there. And it was incredible. It was incredible. I read the one about Dieci Moschi, and towards the end, all of a sudden, I just got this huge lump in my throat because it occurred to me. I mean, I was there, my feet planted solidly on the ground of the ancestral homeland. It was amazing. Felt really, really lucky. So this is the last poem I'm going to read to you, and it's the poem John mentioned in my little intro, November Fruit, because we're moving to that time of the year again. And thank you all again for being here. November Fruit. Wild apples warm in November light. Glowing discs anoint the tips of branches. Sunset, Somerset. As pennies suspended in autumn, the redtail caught freefall. It's not so much the fracture as what we do to repair that matters. First responder, this is your call to beauty. Copper glows through unplucked fruit. Winter feed. Winter freed from autumn. I release you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Can listen to that all night. First responder. What was that line? First responder. This is your call to
Unmute. This is your call to beauty.
yeah. And I'm especially especially partial, I should say, to ancestry poems, and you're just excellent. So
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. Yeah. And look forward to chatting with you in a little bit. So our last reader of the evening, before the open mic, that is Hilda Raz, who is our neighbor, just a mile or so down the road in Placitas, and has a beautiful house overlooking the mountains. Hilda, as has been mentioned, is currently the series editor for poetry at the University of New Mexico Press and the poetry editor for Bosque Press. Prior to her move to New Mexico, she was the editor of the prestigious literary journal Prairie Schooner from 1987 to 2010, and the founding director of the Prairie Schooner Roz Shoemaker Book Prizes. In 1993, she was named the first Lucial professor and editor in the Department of English at the University of Nebraska, where she worked intensively with graduate students in the PhD program. She's published 14 books as a poet, a nonfiction writer, and an editor. And her recent books include Letter from a Place I've Never Been and List and Story. And it's always such a joy to hear Hilda. You can unmute. You're unmute. You're not.
I'm unmuted.
Now you're good. Now you're good. Okay.
Thank you to Jules and John for this amazing community of writers, poets, and for the freedom they give us all to speak and be heard. I'm so moved by tonight's reading, as you might expect. But I also look at Jules and I look at John and all the work they've done for themselves, but especially for all of us. So thank you both. And thank you to Katherine and to Sarah for your truly wonderful poems that University of New Mexico Press has been fortunate enough to publish. So now my own poems. What can I say? I will just, instead of placing them in the context of all of your work, I will just say that for a long time, I was working my way up the academic ladder. And in the early stages of that time, I was allowed 6 weeks off for research. And instead of research, I worked for the Nebraska Arts Council. And they sent me to outstate Nebraska, which taught me a lot. I thought I'd focus on language in this reading. So the first poem I'll call Diction. God is in the details, I tell the kids in the public school at Milligan, Nebraska. They wonder what I mean. I tell them to look out the window at the spring fields, the mud coming up just to the knee of the small pig in the far pasture. They tell me it's not a knee, but a hock. And I had not to say things I know nothing about. I say the light on the mud is pure chalcedony. They say the mud killed 2 cows over the weekend. I tell them the pig is alive and the spring trees are standing in a green haze. They tell me school is out in a week and they have to plant. The grain elevator at the end of Main Street stretches out her blue arms. The kids say, shoots. I was explaining how moved I was by the landscape. And I called them, as a metaphor, arms, but they're not, they're shoots. So there we are. So I guess I'll read Letter from a Place I've Never Been, which is the title poem of my collected poems. Where cold was supposed to be, the sun is warm. You promised no wind. The grass is calm under the snow. The map showed the interior, which is where I am. The trip was long. I knew it would be. From the top of the earth, I saw no mountain, though you promised if the air was clear, the mountain would show. But ribbons of light swirled the vault of the sky. The sun set at 4, the sun rose at 9. Moose and sled dogs, exotic creatures I thought I'd to discover around some corner or other by the salmon processing plant. Never. I brought some sunscreen for a tramp through the woods. No woods, no trees, flat rock that seemed to be granite. I'm scared of the cold, of the dark, of the journey, the unfamiliar plants that perk into poems I've read and reviewed. Some kind of weed, not jewel weed from Robert Frost. Oh, why did I say I'd travel? The tundra is something strange, like a sponge, and golden. Of course, as you know, I was in Alaska. And everything was strange. Okay. Often, because I'm the age of the grandmothers that you've encountered in Katherine's poems and discovered in Sarah's remarkable poem about her mother. People have often in my long career asked me why I'm a poet. I like to answer the question, why are you an editor? But this is vocation. This is my story. Light comes in the window, must be 7 a.m., time for breakfast. But the aroma traveling up the staircase is roast turkey. And now that you've opened your eyes on the window, light is dim, so it must be coming through the open door. Crouched in the window, chair scowl, leaning back on the screen, a bent guy in a hat, his face lined with dark, bends forward into the room and smiles. No, he's laughing, and then he whispers, I've come for you. It's time. And you decide, now that you're awake, you know you can do it, to negotiate. Maybe not now, you're only 8, but later when you're 12, no 30, so far off, and he nods. He's amiable enough, affable, as you'd hoped he would be. And then he is gone. You get up. Didn't you used to have pink sheets on your double bed? Same price as the twin and more flexible for the future. Who said that? But they seem to be blue percale, royal blue with red and black stripes. And while you're brushing your teeth in someone else's bathroom, maybe the one in the Belgian pension where you celebrate your birthday, you decide to go swim in the dark waves. No, maybe to the dining room where you'll order puffy pancakes with apples or strudel, or maybe you should write a book someday. Shouldn't you write a book? Shouldn't everyone who has met death in the window and put him off for a while write a book? That's a true story. I'll close on reading a poem called Letter from a Lost Language. Some time ago, Erin Raslink, who is a visual artist, or was at that time, and I were commissioned to be part of a group for a museum presentation. And Erin was to make a sculpture, and I was to write a poem. Although we could have reversed that, though I couldn't do the sculpture. Erin found at the Goodwill a bin of metal objects, and they looked to us like letters. And he mounted each letter on a piece of hardwood and built a plexiglass case, and he put them on shelves as you would the sentences in this language. So here's my poem, Letters from a Lost Language. That's an epigraph by Jane Hirschfield. An alphabet's molecules, tasting of honey, iron, and salt, cannot be counted. Our life in minerals, wrote the poet, to call up the patient sea. He stands on sand called shore, salt mustache, The letters come, are caught, arranged, erase. Here then is my life in letters, a great weight. A metal alphabet meaning nothing one can decipher. Patience, calls out the poet from the margins. One letter, like a chair, flexes toes. One is a sigh. I have tried all my life to carry weight from the margins to the center. One letter, then another until the click of the box says stop. See the hasp of the lock on the transparent door. See the shadows. Is one a belt buckle? A woman swimming? One arm of a scissors, a chair, a man waving, a clown in a back bend, dog behind a bolt. Zzz, says the guard in the box as he bows his pregnant belly behind Cocapelli to make an urn. Shadows move to erase, shadows move to ease light from the museum windows. Soon we will find the metal key. Again, the poet brushes salt into glowing shapes. Soon the fires will light and we will return to mineral. Thanks so much for being here. And thanks, John, for being the curator of this wonderful evening.
Yeah. Thank you, Hilda. Delightful and provocative, and how we become poets, how we become editors, the questions we keep asking ourselves, right? Yeah, which I guess perhaps leads us into the wider discussion, and I'm going to change my view to gallery. Okay. So I thought Jules and I could maybe ask a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to some of the rest of you as well. And we have a little bit of time. So I was trying to, I felt that especially Sarah and Katherine had had a certain simpatico in their poems and even in their delivery. And I was trying to get a sense of what that was. And I think it has to do with precision of language, precision of observation, whether of the physical world or of emotional states. And but I'm not sure exactly what else, except, that they're both writers who have a lot of craft but aren't showy about it, right? They let the poems speak for themselves. And that might also, I guess, lead into asking Hilda, since you worked with both these poets, what you saw in their work and what drew you, initially to publish them.
Well, I think anyone who's here knows
Mm-hmm.
the poems are beautiful. Of course, they're beautiful, but they're accomplished in terms of craft.
Mm-hmm.
They have a very precise sense of rhythm and musicality to their language. And even now, knowing the poems as I'm listening, I'm just moving my body to them where the lines stop.
Mm-hmm.
But then the content is so moving. It's moving to me, but I'm representative of a wider audience. I've made my life as an editor who has been lucky enough to choose people who then became very famous. And that's why I'm asked to do what I do. And the work is distinguished as the word everyone knows. It's not just I think so. you heard it tonight, exactly what you said. What they have in common to me is rigor, and also discipline of passion.
That's a great phrase, discipline of passion.
Right. I didn't. It was that was there on the page,
Mhm.
and yeah.
Yeah.
I like how you say that too, Hilda, the body, the breath, the poem is the
Yes.
body is part of
Mhm.
your whole self, that emotional part of you, and that being present in the moment. You're carrying us with you in the poems.
Yeah. And so many of the poems mention breath as well. So, and yeah. I was also interested, Sarah, in your Camino poems, what your writing process was on that 500-mile pilgrimage. Did you write poems every day, or did you take notes and write poems later, or how did that work? I mean, it seems to me that doing the journey, doing that, all that hiking, I would be exhausted at the end of that, but somehow you managed to also get a book out of it. So how did that work?
You're right. I was exhausted every night, and I scribbled in my journal the major things of the day, and that was it. When you walk the Camino, you can't stop walking after you're done. So I walked some more after that in different places. And then I set a writing Camino where every day when I was back home, I wrote and absorbed everything that had happened, and wrote one poem at a time about each day. And it took a couple of months. But
writing, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I said, I love that expression, writing Camino.
Writing Camino.
Writing
and a friend of
Camino.
mine who actually the poem Winter Tides was about, she did a painting Camino to keep me company. She was a painter. So she painted while I was walking, which was very sweet. But I wanted to comment on your earlier question, John, and that is what I love about Katherine's poems are the gratitude that comes from observing and being present in the moment with love and with food and with what we've been given. And that comes through so strongly in Katherine's poems. I just love her, the way she takes a food item like an artichoke and turns it into a gift of love across generations. And there's many other of her poems she didn't have time to read. But I think that's where my gratitude comes from as well, is observing the beauty around me, even in the midst of pain and suffering and death and loss, which we've all had a lot of by this time in life and since the pandemic. It's important. It's important to have community, and it's important to witness to how beautiful life really is and what we're handed every day.
But I also want to say that everyone here has the similar passions, but it's the word artichoke that Katherine, the language that Katherine and Sarah carve to present the experience to us, that to me makes their work great.
Yes.
We all are open-hearted or have big, sensitive presence, or we wouldn't be here tonight to love languages that you, Jules and John, make available to us. But it's the language. Enough.
And it's the work that goes into
It is.
into writing Camino. Yes, good. You know, I see Josephine Lorey in the corner there, who had just a week ago, she was in New Mexico and did a lot of, did a wonderful tour. I missed most of it because I was on my own little tour up in New York. But Josephine, I know you have Italian ancestry too, and you've written about that. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about those ancestry poems.
Yes, I loved the poems actually for both. Sarah, I did not go to the Camino. I did not walk the Camino on purpose, but I was in Portugal and we did a day trip up to Braga, and on the ground was the imprint of the seashell. So I walked a tiny section, and I have to say I felt really moved, like even more moved than when I was in Sedona, when they talk about the vertices. So to hear your Camino poem and then to hear you speak about our writing Camino is wonderful. And Catherine, my parents came from Sicily, both parents. So when you started with the artichokes, we call them gagocciole, carciofe, and the process and the spines as you get to the tender heart, it was just ringing so many bells for me. Beautifully done.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Hilda, your poem with the alphabet and how you see and view things so differently than young people do, and you see it with the poet's eyes and heart. It's just a beautiful reading.
Thank you.
Love to be here.
So yeah, let's open it up. We've got just a couple more minutes, so let's open it up to some other questions or comments that folks in the Zoom world have. Yeah, or put in the chat. Irene Blay has something to say.
Thank you. Thank you for this format. I finished a novel, and I had a day where I had nothing to do and I didn't know what to do. And so I was looking forward to this poetry reading, and I'm so glad I was here and that I got to hear the three lovely ladies. I grew up in a steel town where there were a lot of next to Italians, and so I learned a lot of Italian and just loved the code switching, because that's the life, right? They go from one, not they, we go from one language to another, and then we flip right back. And I just thought that was great. I was in Spain this summer for a little bit too long, and the Camino is a very sacred place, isn't it? And I really enjoyed the journey. Thank you. I've never done the journey. I've talked to people. I've watched it. I was in Galicia, and El Camino Compostelo is it's just a sacred space, a very sacred space. And I think you caught that, and I loved it. So I am just really happy that I was able to be here and to hear the three poets. And by the way, Hilda, I love your silver hair. I want hair like yours. I think I'll write a poem about it. Thank you.
I need to write a poem about it because I hate all these curls.
Wish I had curl. Look at this straightness I got here.
Same
I
here.
love your
Same here.
You too.
I want
Yes.
the body. Yeah.
So thank you. I think I will write a poem about silver hair.
Good.
Silver-haired ladies that know beauty and
Yeah.
know how to express it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene, and congratulations on finishing your novel. How long did that take you?
I did. It didn't take very long. I knew Rudy Anaya very, very well for 50 some years.
Wow.
And so I'll just tell you a dumb story. I was driving, we live in the same neighborhood, and I was driving near his house, and all of a sudden I heard him say, "Irene, take me to my house." I said, no. And that's how the book begins, but it's called Talking with Rudy. And I'm just going to let it sit for about 3 weeks or a month, and then come back and read it and see how it feels before I look for a publisher. So
Excellent.
yeah, thank you. Thank
Nice.
you.
And Rodolfo Anaya, one of the greatest New Mexico authors ever. So.
Yeah, help put New
Yeah.
Mexico literature on the map.
Yes. So time for one or two more questions or comments. Yeah, Brett.
I usually have a really hard time remembering more than a few words of somebody's poem to put in the chat. But Hilda, you ended one of your poems with this wonderful question. Shouldn't everyone who has met death in the window and put him off write a book?
Mhm.
Uh, I love that.
That was, yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
That really happened to me. That was, I mean, we all have remarkable dreams, and Catherine and Sarah
Yeah.
dream in their books. But when I was a child, that happened. Though it must have been a dream, I have no idea. But to me, then and now, it still seems real. So
It's probably what made you a poet. It was probably.
I like to imagine. So
Yeah. Jules, any last
I think
comments?
that's a good one to end on
Yeah, I
because
think, how can you get better
so
than that? Yes.
the book.
So, yeah. So we have a relatively small number of
Okay, I'm gonna stop the
oh,
recording
yeah.
now. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.